At some point, we've all thought it. They're so smart, but they just don't focus. They never finish what they start. Why can't they just get organized? And maybe deep down, we've started to wonder, is it them or is it something we're missing? It's what helps us plan, focus, manage emotions, and remember what comes next. But when a child's executive function is still developing, no matter how hard they try or how much we push, their brain just isn't ready to learn in the way that we expect. Yet. But the good news, executive functions can be strengthened. And when they are, everything changes. In my conversation with executive function and ADHD coach Crista Hopp, we'll learn how to recognize executive function challenges early, how to support growth without shame, and how to make learning and life feel possible. Executive functions develop differently in everyone. When focus, flexibility, self-regulations feel hard, it's not about effort, it's about development. No one is lazy. No one is broken. Every brain learns in its own way. And with support, executive functions can flourish. This week on The Joy of Neurodiversity. Hey, it's Joy, and this is the Joy of Neurodiversity podcast. Here we break down stereotypes, celebrate the brilliance of different minds, and get real about what it actually means to be neurodivergent. Because at the heart of it all, neurodiversity isn't just a concept, it's people. It's lived experiences, challenges, strengths, and the stories that connect us. Whether you're here to learn, feel seen, or reimagine what's possible, you're in the right place. By pressing play, you're choosing to embrace a new way of thinking, one that honors every brain for what it brings. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to the Joy of Neurodiversity podcast, where we celebrate the many ways that minds work. Many people say that Crista is the guru when it comes to executive functioning, and just speaking to her, I would have to agree with that. And I honestly cannot wait to have this conversation. So Crista, welcome to the Joy of Neurodiversity. I am so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
No, I guess I should give the audience a little bit of a background. I was doing a podcast first season with a mother-daughter duo, Sophia and Angela. If you've not seen that podcast, go and check it out because they're awesome. And anytime we started talking about anything that had to do about executive function, Angela was like, oh, you need Crista Hopp. Like, she is amazing. Anytime I have anything to do with executive function, I go to her. And so I was like, oh, and then I started researching you. Then I just prayed like, oh gosh, I hope she would be willing to come onto the podcast. And you were, so thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just, I think that it's something that is so needed just in my life now as an adult. Like, as you were talking about certain things and I've researched, I'm just like, I can use this. Chris, I know that no one really lands in this work by accident, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and then what led you into the world of executive function?
I actually feel like I did fall into it accidentally.
Did
or maybe
you?
being in the right place at the right time.
Okay, tell me more.
I started off my career working in residential care. I worked with kids that were dually diagnosed. So they had both an intellectual disability as well as mental health challenges. And then I went to grad school and I thought I wanted to go into counseling, quickly realized that I actually didn't like it. But at the same time, I was learning neuropsychological testing in school and I met a neuropsychologist and I started doing research with her and I absolutely fell in love with it. We were looking at the development of kids that were born preterm and we were looking at them at ages 3, 6, and 9. And we would do a full neuropsychological battery on them. And I quickly realized as I was working in this project, and eventually I was hired as their research psychologist, I quickly realized that there was this whole group of kids that really needed services where maybe the disability was hidden, but there's also was this whole group of kids where they didn't have a disability, but they still needed the support. And so I had school loans to pay off. Fun, fun. And I thought, oh, let me start this. Let me start coaching as like a part-time thing. And so I started doing it part-time. And I'm so glad I did because there's just this group out there, whether it's anxiety or depression, or it's they were born very premature, and it could just be that they just are struggling with executive functions that are not going to get the help because they're not always identified. So,
Mm.
yeah. Yeah.
So I guess you did fall into it, but I mean,
Right.
I'm sure that the world is happy. I'm happy that you did. Let's just go down to just the basics. What is executive function and why does it matter?
Yeah. So the definition is so simple that you would think that it's a really simple concept because it really is any cognitive skill that we use to reach a goal. Sounds pretty simple, right?
Yeah,
But it's not. The science behind it and what's happening in the brain, there's just so much happening. And I think it's so important for us to understand it because research has shown that executive function's the number one predictor of academic success. But I
Mm,
would actually argue it's life success because when we look at an individual and their ability to succeed, it really does come down to their executive functions.
absolutely. So any tool you need to reach a goal,
Any cognitive skill. So these are
any
just
cognitive
brain-based
skill,
skills. Mhm.
it's it sounds so simple, but then I feel like when you're having to, like, I was speaking to my best friend. She was like talking about her son. He's going to his school goes to middle school at fifth grade.
Wow. Big
And she was
transition.
like, yes. And she was like, he does so well academically, but his executive function skills, we need to figure something out. And she was like, and it's very hard for me to understand why is he doing so well academically, but then simple things in life every single day, like we are really struggling. And I said, I have someone who you can who you can contact. But okay.
That transition is so difficult because actually what happens is our expectations are actually unrealistic. The things that we're expecting neurotypical kids to do in middle school is unrealistic. And so for our kids that might be neurodivergent, that
Mm,
transition is just really challenging. Yeah.
absolutely. I wanted to see, I'm not even sure if I even know what executive function skills are, like on a basic level, and what they might be on a more advanced level. So can you walk me through that? Because when we were talking and preparing for this podcast, you said something to me about organization and it being like pretty advanced, and it made me feel seen because I have a really hard time with like organizing things. And so what are like a basic skill that comes to executive function and what is more advanced?
So I would imagine that when you were talking with your best friend, she probably said something about organization or time
Mm,
management or
yes.
planning because
Hmm.
that's what everybody thinks about when we think about executive functions. But the concern is those are advanced executive functions. So in the world of executive functioning, there are certain executive functions that are considered foundational. And really they're considered foundational because they really need to be in place for us to focus on these higher level executive functions. Now don't get me
Mm,
wrong, just because we need to work on the foundational ones doesn't mean we're going to ignore those advanced. We're not going to ignore anything. But what we are going to do is make sure that we're supporting those, that we're at least acknowledging those foundational executive functions. So, what are they? Attention. That's a really big executive function. More often than not, people just want to associate attention with ADHD, but it's actually an executive function. We also have cognitive flexibility, our ability to think about things in more than one way, to be flexible. Then we also have working memory, and that is actually the executive function. That is the number one predictor of academic success. And that is our ability to take an information, manipulate that information, and do something with it. As I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm thinking about the next executive function that I want to talk about. and I am actually utilizing my working memory. I'm actually utilizing my working memory to hold on to that while I'm still talking to you. And so the
Yeah.
next one, the next one before I forget, because my working memory is not great, is regulation.
Okay.
So those are our foundational. And regulation, I like to incorporate all of regulation together because, in my opinion, whether I am regulating my emotions, my body, or my actions, it's all about regulation. Some people would like to
Hmm.
put response inhibition separate, but I just like to have it under that regulation umbrella. Those are all foundational. So they really need to be in place before we think about planners, before we think about time management. And, I'm sure I mentioned this when we were talking initially. If
Yeah.
there's a career that is attached to an executive function, that is
Mm-hmm.
not an easy executive function. And if we think about it, we have party planners, we have administrative assistants, we have professional organizers. These are all careers that revolve around organization, planning, and time management. So it's very
It made me
important.
feel so seen when you said that, because I'm just like, I have given way too much of my money to like the Container Store and all these things. I'm just like, I'm gonna organize my life. I'm gonna color code everything. And it doesn't work that way for me. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, that made me feel it made so much sense to me.
I really like to emphasize this because what I find is too often when people are trying to give executive function support, they jump to that planner, they jump to organization, they're jumping to those and without even thinking about the foundational executive functions.
And you need those foundational executive functions to set yourself up for success to tackle the more advanced.
Exactly.
It
Exactly.
makes
So
complete sense.
well, think about it. If we're unable to regulate ourselves emotionally, right? Then if you hand me a planner and tell me to use this planner, but I can't regulate myself, so I get upset really easily. I
Mm.
also can't remember everything that the teacher's telling me to write it in the planner. So, how am I going to focus on that planner if I'm struggling with my working memory? I'm struggling with regulating myself because I'm getting so upset that I can't remember the information. I must be stupid. I must be dumb. I can't remember this
Mhm.
information. And then you're expecting me to work on a planner. So, it just makes sense to focus on those first before
Yes.
handing somebody that tool to use that they're not ready to use.
It makes so much sense to me. And so my background is I'm an educator, and I started out my career teaching first graders. And I really had to remind myself that when I'm giving first graders directions, and they're having to think through, like, even if it's get up, go get your paper, get your pencil, get back to your seat, like there's a lot of steps and things that they have to remember in their little 6-year-old brains to do all those things within their working memory, and then they forget one step, they're all upset. It reminds me of, what was it, Schoolhouse Rocks, when the little girl was like going to the grocery store and her mom was like, I need you to get like a carton of eggs, a bottle of milk, and something ever. And she was saying it over and over and over again in her
Mhm.
head. And she felt
Mhm.
so successful. Like, to me, I don't think people realize how difficult it is for some people to have that working memory and remember those things. And then to your point, the second when you do that, you forget or you get flustered and then you're not regulated. And then that adds so much more to the top. Okay, I'm sorry, I digress.
Let me just add one more thing because I don't want people walking away saying Krista Hopp is saying do not use planners. I don't want people saying that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what I'm saying is while we're working on teaching working memory, while we're teaching on, regulation and flexibility, we're going to model a planner. We're going to support them in the use of a planner, but we're not going to expect them to do it independently. And
Mm.
that's important. So we don't want to ignore them, those advanced executive functions, but we have to recognize that we are probably going to be doing more modeling than actually having the student do it independently.
Absolutely. And also, and I would just like to, for my dyslexic self and planners, because I always think the planners are going to help me. I have a million of them and they never do. Planners, like the way that people take notes, all those things I feel are so specific to a way that someone's brain works. And so modeling and allowing people to figure out a way that works for them, if they do it a little bit different than you, it doesn't mean that it's done wrong. Because I've been told so many times, like, oh no, that's not the way you do it. But my brain didn't process it the way that I was being told I had to do it. And so again, it just made me really upset, and I couldn't, and then I felt like I was dumb and couldn't do things. And it was really just like that didn't work for my brain.
You know, you mentioned in the beginning that I'm an educator too, and that's a
Mm.
really important role that I have because too often I have seen individuals out there that believe because they have a master's in counseling psychology or a master's in education that they can become an executive function coach without any specialized instruction. But what happens is when they do that, they are giving usually one type of tool. They are saying
Yeah.
to the student, okay, Google is what you're going to use as your planner, or you're going to use a written planner. And the reality is all of our brains are unique, no matter who we are, neurodivergent or neurotypical. And I'm not really sure I believe that people are neurotypical, but that's a whole nother conversation.
I totally am with you on that.
but but no matter who we are, what works for me is not necessarily what's going to work for you. So often as an executive function coach, I feel like I'm a detective with students. It's like, what is going to be that right tool? And so I have to introduce students sometimes to 5 or 6 different tools before they find the one that's right for them. And
Yeah.
that is something that I just think is really important to mention because that specialization, understanding the brain science before we actually go to the tools is essential.
Absolutely. So I guess that kind of segues into my next question. If there is just one or two things about executive function, and you might have already mentioned some, but if there is one or two things that you wish everyone understood about executive function and its impact on daily life and on relationships, or just anyone, people's relationships with themselves, what would you want that to be?
I think there's two things. One is that anytime we have an individual with executive function deficits, now
Mm,
we all have executive functions, every single one of us. We all have strengths and we all have challenges, again, no matter
mm,
who we are, but we don't all have deficits. But for individuals that have deficits, we can usually see a 3-year delay in their executive functions. So think about this. If you have that individual in 5th grade who's starting middle school, they still are presenting like an elementary age kid, and they're 3
mhm.
years behind. So we have to keep that in mind. That's the first thing. And while I kind of have that in mind, it's not my second point, but I'll still mention it, is that
Okay.
there is no difference. I mean, there is a difference between intelligence and executive function. And so we can have, and often I am working with kids that are 2E, twice exceptional, but they have the superior intelligence, but their executive functions are average. And average is not average when we're talking about individuals whose cognitive skills are in the superior range. So I just think that that's important to keep in mind when we think about this 3-year delay.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much. Okay. I feel like I have some more questions that are coming up because of that. So,
Okay.
for instance, so for myself, I am twice exceptional. So I'm
Okay.
dyslexic, but when I was being diagnosed, when they're trying to figure out what's going on with me, like my reasoning skills, everything was just off the charts. And so they were saying, "Oh, she's really intelligent. She's just lazy." And
Hmm.
I just completely shut down because I didn't have the skills that I needed. And so I'm wondering, I'm trying to figure out what my question might be here, but I'm wondering when we have students who are twice exceptional, is it difficult to even determine what is the deficit because their intelligence is making it a little bit difficult to just pinpoint what really might be the issue. Is that a question?
I think kind of, so I'm going to take it as a question because I have an
Okay,
answer.
take it as a
But
question. It's kind of my
I think what happens is, often these kids are not diagnosed or they're diagnosed later in life. We're usually seeing that diagnosis, ironically, usually around high school, like entering high school. And that
Hmm.
is because they present so high, usually with verbal skills, right? Or even their
Hmm.
nonverbal skills, that we're really not recognizing that they have these challenges. Our twice exceptional kids are so good at covering things up. But what
Yes.
happens is that self esteem gets knocked and knocked and knocked. And it's so shattering to see, because as an executive function coach, I see students that are in such a vulnerable position, because even though we don't mean it as adults, our words have meaning, and
Absolutely.
they're usually not intentional, but they have meaning. And so our students walk away sometimes from experiences and they're like, well, I'm not going to try that again. Like, why would I
Yeah.
try that again if that's what somebody's going to say to me? Or I guess I am lazy, because people keep on telling me I'm lazy. People keep on telling me I'm unmotivated. Um, I'm really excited because I'm in the process of finishing up these executive function cards, and they're going to be for parents and educators. And one of the cards is actually going to have what is the educator or the parent misconception. And it will have like a student thought, like what is the student thinking? And then what is the parent or the educator thinking? And then how can we reframe that moment? Because I see it so often that we are
So
seeing
often.
that misconception. Yeah. So the other thing,
Absolutely.
you had asked two things, and I did have a second
Hmm.
one, and I have been
Okay.
able to hold on to it this long. So
I'm impressed. I'm impressed.
so the other thing is our abilities, our executive functions, the way that they present fluctuate in different sorts of situations. So how often have you heard a parent say, my kid can sit in front of the TV or they can play video games for hours, but then you ask them to do their homework and they can't focus. They can't problem solve. Like, I don't get
Yeah.
it. Like, and the reality is our executive functions can be really strong in some situations. Yes, there's a whole nother conversation about the reward circuit, the motivational circuit, and dopamine, but we're
Mhm.
not going to go into that today. But the reality is they can seem really strong sometimes, and then in other situations they can seem completely different, and so we have to keep that in mind. I've even had students in the past in high school where in their school, they're in their academics, they're really struggling with problem solving and just initiating things and different things like that, but they had a job and they were doing really well with their
Yeah.
job, right? So we do see that difference sometimes in different environments.
I'm taking notes. I'm like, this is how these questions are coming up. You mentioned that if someone has a deficit, they could possibly be 3 years, or we see that they're 3 years like delayed from their peers. But for me, it would be helpful, maybe it would be helpful for other people to see, to know, what does that actually look like? How does that manifest? So if someone is behind in their executive functioning skills, or if they have a deficit, how might that present so that people know how to look out for that?
So this is a little tricky because our executive functions develop over time. It's actually the last part of the brain to develop. It's the prefrontal cortex. Because it's
Mhm.
the last part of the brain to develop and it doesn't finish developing until early 30s. We used to think it was mid 20s,
Oh,
but more current research is showing late 20s, early 30s. Because
okay.
that is happening, it's really hard to answer this question exactly because every
Mm,
executive function is developing at different times. But
okay.
let's just take working memory. So, working memory is our ability to take an information, manipulate that information, and do something with it. A student that is struggling in working memory is going to have difficult with instructions, like you mentioned earlier, giving those instructions to your first graders. They are also going to have difficulties like writing things down, even notes, because remember, think about it. We're gathering information as we're listening to someone. We have to decide what's the most important, and then we have to write it down. Um, if you're cooking in the kitchen and you are working on a recipe and you look at that recipe card and you're like, okay, I need 1 cup, 2 teaspoons. And then you look away and you're like, oh, how many teaspoons were those? That's another kind of time.
That
But
is
with
me.
so our kids that we see usually struggling with something like working memory, it could be they are forgetting. They get lost kind of in the middle of a task, right? Or they might divert their attention to something else to kind of cover up the fact that they forgot about the rest of the task. So that's
Mm.
working memory itself. But overall, I would say if you have a student, if you're an educator, if you have a student who is sitting there, who is stuck, who is not handing in their assignments, who is
Mm.
doing the minimal amount of work, or this is the number one bit of feedback I see from educators, no matter if a kid's in elementary or college, needs to provide more details in writing. If
Ah,
you find
yeah.
yourself as an educator giving these, seeing these things in a student, they probably do need a referral to be evaluated.
Okay.
Evaluation is key, in my opinion. Now, yes, I did work
Mm.
under a neuropsychologist. That was my training in executive functions. But the reality is when we look at things like working memory and processing speed and different things like that, we really have to test it. And
Mm.
because so many of our kids are 2E, not saying that everybody is, but a lot of
Yeah.
our kids are 2E that I work with, we want to make sure that we're not missing a learning disability that is being
Mhm.
shaded by higher level, like, cognitive skills in other places. So that's what you should look for as an educator. As a parent, I would say it's your kid who's, maybe really, really messy, unorganized, get lost in time. Say to you, oh, I'm just going to do this for 5 minutes. And then it's been like an hour or 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
They have difficulties regulating their emotions. Lots of times we like to talk about that emotional piece, like associated with autism or something like that. But lots of kids have difficulties regulating their emotion. It's not just,
Mhm.
one group of individuals. So that can be difficult. That black and white thinking, that inability to see somebody else's viewpoint. So when we see kids that struggle with this, like, you say to your kid, okay, you have baseball practice on Tuesday. Kid's really excited about baseball practice on Tuesday. But
Mm.
Tuesday rolls around, it's raining. This kid is crushed. You told me I have baseball. I have baseball. Why? I'm going to baseball.
Yeah.
It's raining. Like the rain is falling from the sky. But that type of thinking is their inability to have that cognitive flexibility being really strong. So these are some of the things that we want to look for. Another thing is, and this can be for both parents and educators, reading between the lines. Lots of our students have difficulties with social skills because either they're not able to focus on the conversation, or they're missing some of the social cues or reading between the lines. And so that can be another big sign for some of our students who are really struggling.
Okay. I'm thinking of students or just anyone who might be functioning well in their current circumstance, right? I think I talked to you about this about my niece. She is an elite athlete. She keeps her life very well, like, or she does well. She has great grades. She manages her schedule with her softball and what have you. But then I'm wondering, when she's put into a new circumstance, like she's a junior, so she's getting ready to go off to uni. When students are put into, or anyone's put into a new circumstance where they have to then shift and then maybe acquire new skills, what does that process look like? I'm sorry, this is a question that I did not tell you I was going to throw
No,
at you, but
that's perfect. No, it's perfect.
yeah.
Anytime there's that transitional period, I have students who will start with me like in middle school, might do a little bit of their high school with me, finish high school on their own, but then will come back for that transition for college. I have a law student that I have been working on and off with since he was in 8th grade, and he's now a
Wow.
law student. So every single time he has that transition, he comes back just to make sure. And ironically, it's been such an amazing thing to watch because, getting him in 8th grade where he was the kid who, couldn't find the homework if he did it or didn't do it because he forgot it, to now he's in his, entered law school a year early. And,
Mm.
rather than focusing on academics, we're now focusing on, hey, I realized I never learned how to cook, and I don't even know how to have a healthy kind of meal plan, And we're talking about like incorporating exercise into his week. Like, so the transitional periods are really important. And I would say that if we do have a student who's struggling, it's really good to get a coach in place, at least for that first semester when they're making
Mm.
that transition. My law student now, we only meet 15 minutes a week during the academic year. And to be honest with you, he probably could go solo. But it is good that, he still has me in place because we are working on these other life skills that involve executive functions. So, yeah.
And it's good to know that it's normal for everyone to be going through these different, just making those small little minor adjustments. It makes me think about, I work with teachers, I work with parents around the globe, and often I'm working with students and parents who are at very, demanding, rigorous schools. And sometimes I feel that parents have very unrealistic expectations about what their students should be able to do at certain times, or applying what they're able to do as an adult in terms of organization and to their child. And so I love that you've been able to say, like, these are foundational skills. If and what I feel like I hear you saying is that even if you've gotten to the point where you are more equipped to deal with some of the more advanced executive function skills, if one of those foundational skills gets pulled out, or some, like, I almost feel like it's like a Jenga set. And correct me if
Mhm.
I'm wrong.
You're
But if
right.
you're in a situation where you've dealt with things very well and then you're dysregulated,
Yep. Yep.
or you're thrown off of your game in some way, like you said, with the rain, or something didn't go in a way that you expected, then you have to have those skills to go back down and address what might be amiss, and then go back to deal with the more complicated or more advanced skills, is what I kind of feel like I hear.
Absolutely. And I think the perfect example of this is the crisis that we're seeing in our adolescents when it comes to mental health, right? Obviously, people want to say it happened since COVID, but it actually started it started before then. But we are seeing
Mm,
this decrease in their ability to kind of be able to manage anxiety, to be able to manage depression. So we have a lot more adolescents that are being diagnosed with depression and anxiety. Those two things have executive function challenges associated with them. Actually, working
okay.
memory can be a predictor of whether or not someone is, struggling with depression or they're out of that depression. So we know that those executive functions are being impacted. So it's not even just these transitional periods of time, like you
Mm,
said. If for some reason that foundational executive function like regulation is off because of anxiety, because of depression, or just overall, then they are probably going to struggle with some of the higher executive functions as well. And this is where we see some of those big changes sometimes with kids, where it's like, well, they were fine in middle school and like they entered high school and everything fell apart, like,
yeah.
or college. Unfortunately, we're seeing it as coaches, we're seeing so many more referrals for college age kids because,
Mm.
they might have had it pretty controlled in high school, but then when they get to college, they're really struggling. So, yeah.
I remember clear as day. I was sitting in at Hampton University. We had to sit in University 101, and one of the professors came, and he had this big calendar up on the screen, and he was saying, if you have 16 hours, 16 credit hours, then you are in class 16 hours a week.
Hmm.
And then he put up like little examples, and he's like, all of this is your free time.
Hmm.
You
Yep.
might be in class 2 hours a day,
Yep.
and you now have to manage what you're. And I was like, oh my goodness. And he was like, and don't just go back to your dorm, because you're going to go back to your dorm, you're going to go to sleep.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
he gave like, and I was just like, it just dawned on me that I am not I don't have to be in class all day, and no one is really going to call me or call my parents if I don't. And it was it scared me. So I did everything. I did what he suggested. I made my calendar, I filled in and gave myself time. Like I put it around my soap operas and when I wanted to
Mhm.
eat and filled everything in and I did that for a little while and then I fell off. But it scared me. It scared me
And
enough that I was like, oh,
sometimes you gain so many skills doing that process that you can leave that behind because you have learned how to manage your time, and you look at your day and you're like, okay, I have to get this done, this done, this done, and then this is what I want time for. So sometimes we don't always need to continue that, that document. But I can't tell you how many times I've done that same exact exercise with students, and lots of times I like to get my high school students ready for college by doing that. And so one of the things that I do is I'll pull out college syllabi from my current college students and I'll share it with my high school students because so
mm,
many of them think I'm going to have so much time. No, you're not.
you don't. You don't. You don't. You do and you don't, but those deadlines sneak up on you, man. They absolutely do.
They
Okay,
do.
so we understand. I mean, I have a much better understanding of what the different layers of executive function are. What does that look like? But how do we help? So can we talk about what support and what coaching looks like when it comes to executive functioning? Because that's one thing that I did not really realize what goes into that. I still might not. So what does it look?
So coaching is a very and especially executive function coaching with a trained executive function coach is going to look
Mm,
very different than academic coaching or ADHD coaching. And the reason it's going to look different is because we usually start with where is the student? So where are their strengths? Because we want to utilize those strengths with their challenges. So we usually are coaching from an executive function perspective. And what we do is for that individual, we determine what are the areas that we need to work on. It looks different for every single student. In fact, I'm really kind of excited because I have a new student that I'm going to start working with, and she's actually an old student that I had in high school, but she's now come to me. She's getting ready to take her MCAT for medical school, but she's the mom of a 3-year-old who's also
wow.
neurodivergent. Yeah. So
Mm,
I'm actually going to be coaching from this perspective of, okay, I have to coach her as a student, but I also have to coach her as the mom, especially the mom of a neurodivergent child. So I
yeah.
have to make sure that I'm incorporating all of that into coaching. And so for our students, strictly students, what we usually do, we're checking their portals. We make sure that we have access to those portals. I usually like to have the students access because then you're seeing exactly what the teacher is posting to the students. And then what we do is we try to look at, what's happening, right? Like if academics are one of the things that we're working on, we want to see what's happening academically. But this is
Mm,
really good for another reason. This past year, I have a student in college who I've worked with for a very long time. She has dyslexia, dysgraphia, ADHD. And I noticed that she had missing assignments. And so missing assignments are kind of a reality for us that are coaches. We see them often. And rather than jumping to this conclusion of like, okay, this is task initiation, or she forgot, like, time management, like what planning, what is it? I actually investigated it. I didn't make assumptions. And that's really important as a coach is not to make assumptions. And so I said to her, so in history, I see that the assignments that you're missing are reading assignments. Like what's happening? And she's like, well, my history teacher is teaching it all wrong. It's not correct. She's like, so I'm really struggling reading because the book is actually not even right. Like, so she's really, and she's a history buff. So it's like,
okay.
but she has a 97 in that class. So I'm like, okay, I
Mm,
get it. Like, you have a 97. You're not going to be doing these assignments if you're not motivated to do them. That makes perfect sense to me.
yeah.
And then I noticed that chemistry, I was also seeing reading assignments that were missing. And so I said, well, but what's happening in chem? Because you don't have a 97 in this class. And in fact, you need every point that you can get. And she said, well, I'm getting headaches. And I said, oh, you're getting
Mm,
headaches. Why do you think you're getting headaches? Now, that was a really important question because she also has a history of concussions. So I wanted to make sure, like, where was this coming from? And she said to me, I think I'm trying to focus so hard on reading that it's actually causing me to get a headache. And
Oh, wow.
so that's why, as an executive function coach, we really have to look at a student in a moment. So there's not really a typical path of what coaching always is because it can
Mm,
always shift. So it's summer. I'm not working with her, but I have sent her 3 messages now that says, have you made sure to get that reading accommodation in place for September, to make sure that she gets the audiobooks in place. So I guess my point is that when we are working with a student, it's very individualized. If you reach out for coaching help and the coach says to you, "Well, this is the curriculum that I use," run. You want to run as fast as you can. If they tell
okay.
you, "I am going to teach your student how to use Google Calendar," run, because we want to treat your student as an individual and we want to make
Yeah.
sure that the tools are right for them and the coaching is right for them. And so that is really important that we make sure that those things are in place. We do everything from helping kids clean their rooms, backpacks, to helping with regulation, teaching how to regulate, teaching having A plans, B plans. The variety is, I mean, like, I even had a coach over the weekend that said, "Hey, so and so's mom called me because she was, like, kind of freaking out and she needed me to calm her down." I mean, like, we wear many hats, but
Yeah.
coaching is definitely one resource that you can get for your student. If they're a college student, lots of colleges do have academic support. They're not always enough for our kids that are neurodivergent just because it's usually like a 15-minute check-in or twice a week, and often our kids
Mm,
need more than that. But that is one way. Also, getting your kid evaluated. Sometimes this can be very difficult with school districts because school districts will say, well, they have all A's. They're doing
yes.
fine. They don't need any support. Yes,
Mm,
they do. So,
yeah.
because the rule is, especially in the US, is that it's any life skill that is impacting their academics, whether that is reading, whether that is focusing, whether that is processing, all of those things are impacting their ability to do their schoolwork. Get them evaluated by a psychologist or a neuropsychologist, or if the school can do it for free, that's even better because testing is not cheap, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But
at all.
you want to make sure that they're tested. You don't just want that diagnosis from your pediatrician because they are not evaluating things like processing speed, working memory,
Mm,
different types of memory, different types of attention, performance things. They're just looking at a questionnaire, usually from a teacher and a parent, and going, oh, okay, they have ADHD or they have this. So you really want to make sure that you have that evaluation completed to make sure that your students really getting that support that they need.
okay, I have a couple of follow-up questions after you said that. Because I hear that it's really giving students the support that they need to be able to thrive. But I have seen it time and time and time again that parents, sometimes through their care and wanting to make sure that their students are prepared and have everything that they need, are often like a barrier to their child being able to be independent and access some of these skills that you might be working on. For instance, I can't tell you how many parents I have banned from, especially in Dubai when everyone has multiple nannies and drivers and everything else. Like, I'm like, no, your driver cannot come in and take all of your child's belongings and put them away and organize them. No, you can't do that. No, you can't come and feed your child at school. Like, there's so many things that are happening, and I saw the same thing in the States. So what can you do to kind of help parents understand that sometimes their love and care can be hindering their child's development of certain fundamental skills that they need to be able to develop?
Yeah, so when I start coaching, especially with a teen, if I'm coaching students that are younger, actually, if we get a referral for that's 10 or younger, we actually do a combination of parent and student coaching because at
Okay.
that age there needs to be so many environmental changes that the parent needs coaching. Now, I'm
Mm,
going to say that lots of times our parents of neurodivergent kids have been raised by parents who parented them as neurotypicals. And what happens,
yes.
they are used to modeling after the way that they were parented, and they don't know that they have to parent a kid who's neurodivergent different. And so
Mm,
I always explain to some parents, you've done nothing wrong as a parent. This is not an
yeah.
evaluation of you or your parenting skills, but you need to understand the brain science of what's happening with your kid and why we have to do things different. And
Mm,
so, I highly recommend attending free webinars if you have access to free webinars. If you have the ability to hire a coach, that is really great because as a coach who's used working with teens, I ask parents to take steps backwards. I say to them, can you take a couple steps backwards and let us work it on this skill? I don't want you to touch this skill. Please step away. If you have that ability to do that, right? Because as the coach, we know how to model when to start taking away that support. But we also can teach parents that. We do try to meet with some of our parents and say, this is what we would like you to try at home. But we also have
mm,
some of the same challenges as you do, where we have very busy parents that don't always have the time to do that, unfortunately, or have hired other professionals to do it. And so it is tricky, but I think that parents have to look for different resources. And I think that they also just have to understand that, yes, this is a process. And yes, we need to model, but modeling is not you doing your kids' homework when they're playing video games, right? Like, that's
absolutely.
not
Yeah.
modeling. Or your chauffeur putting the backpack away while your kid has gone to get a snack. Like, that is not
Mm,
modeling. Modeling is you doing it, the kid is watching you do it, and you're interacting with your child as you're modeling it. And I will
mm,
say two things on this. Change is not linear, right? So change does not happen like this. It is more like this, right? We take a step forwards, we take two steps backwards. So keeping that in mind, and also, I like to tell parents, we are planting seeds. That is what we are doing. We're planting a seed. And sometimes when I am coaching a student, I don't even see that seed like break through the soil. But I'll get a phone call several years later from a student going, you made such an impact. Well, actually, it's a text message. They don't call people. But well, they'll send me a text message and say, I just want to let you know, or this made such an impact. Or last year, I had a college student who reached out to me and hadn't been coached for several years and said, I'm coming to you now as a person. Like, my parents didn't tell me to call you. I'm calling you because I need you. So we want to recognize that these changes take time. It is not an overnight fix it thing. Executive functions develop into their 30s. So remember, we are not going to see quick fixes.
is asking or knowing that you need support and help, is that an executive function skill?
So that's a very good question. I would
Mm,
say that there are so many executive functions that impact that skill that probably not the asking. Well, I guess you could think of asking it for help as a problem solving. So if you use different words, then yes. But I do emphasize a lot on asking for help. I'm looking because I just had a bookmark here, but I can't reach it. Where we actually teach kids the steps to ask for help because
mm,
there is so much. A kid has to be flexible, right? So they have to be able to see something from another person's perspective. Oh, my teacher showed me how to do the math this way, but I'm at home now and mom is telling me to do it this way. I have to be flexible enough to think about it in a different way. I have to
yeah.
be able to be regulated. Yeah, even though my fifth grade teacher, humiliated me for the whole class when I sent an email asking for help, I'm going to try
Yeah.
it again now in eighth grade. So there's so many things that are part of that, so many executive
Yeah.
functions that I would say that it is being impacted probably 99.9% by executive functions. Yeah.
It's something that I just thought of. I do a lot of work with NLP and going and finding those subconscious blocks that you have. It's so difficult for me to ask for help in any circumstance. I am always willing to give help, but I do not allow people to help me. And I'm getting better. I should not say I don't allow it because I've done so much work around it, but it always goes back to that 6, 7, 8 year old Joy who was struggling so desperately because I did not know that I was dyslexic or ADHD or have Erlin syndrome. And I was screaming for help, but people just didn't understand my existence, the way my brain worked. And so I was never given that help. So I have such a hard time asking for it now. And I'm just like, is that an executive function skill that I need to develop
And
more?
I'll be happy to share a link with you that you can put in the show notes where individuals
Okay.
can actually download the bookmark that has our 3 steps for asking for help. And I also have a video to talk about it because when we give like a system to students, like when we give them the steps and we teach them the steps, it becomes easier because again, we're relying on that working memory to like, how do I even ask for help, right? So we actually teach kids an actual system, and I'll be happy to share that bookmark with everyone.
Thank you. I would really appreciate that. I'm sure the listeners will as well. And I think it's a good segue for us to go into. We've talked about what can we do in terms of executive function on a personal level with our personal lives, but so much of your day, so much of what's going on in life are looking at outside people, classrooms, teachers, systems, environments, those types of things. And so I really want to look at what you are the work that you're doing to help support teachers, because I even know for myself or teachers, and I'm assuming that you might do some work with organizations or what have you as well. So, but I know for myself, I wasn't given any training
Mhm.
about, well, one, about neurodivergence, but also about executive function. It's something that I've only more recently started looking into. So I wanted to give some time for you to talk about the powerful work that you're doing with training programs for educators and a wide range of individuals. But what are some of the light bulb moments that you've seen people having when they realize how much executive function skills influence success in learning, accept it, success in life and work, and everyday ins and outs of just existing?
So I have a 30-hour course that is called Mastering Executive Function, and it's for educators. And I define educators as teachers, tutors, coaches, even therapists, right? We're
Yeah.
all working with students, usually educating them in some way or helping them in some way. And with that course, I've had quite a few students. I have one student in particular who was a retired teacher after 30 years, took the course and said, I cannot believe I taught 30 years without knowing this information. I just cannot
Yeah.
believe it. Just understanding the science behind it, what I have to do first. In fact, she contacted me about a month ago and said, I'm working with a student and she was a writing like writing was what she focused on as a teacher. So she was a writing teacher.
Mm.
So she says, I have a student who is reading and dad thinks we need to hire a tutor, but I really think it's executive function based. I really think that they're struggling to comprehend what they're reading, and I think that they're having difficulties taking what they comprehend and then writing. She's like,
Mm.
and she kind of described the student a little more, and she said, what do you think? And I'm like, you're absolutely right. And she learned that in the course, and that is why she was able to kind of put her coach hat on and say, you know what, this is not like reading intervention. That's not what's needed. It's executive functions in reading. And there is a difference. And as coaches, trained coaches, we know when to make that recommendation. But so that was one person. So another individual recently was taking it and said she did the module that's on motivation, procrastination, and task initiation. And she said,
Mm.
oh my God, I never realized what was happening in the brain when it comes to motivation. She's like, this was such an eye opener. And so for
Yeah.
me, it's important to not only give the tools to educators, like the organization and planning and all of that, but I want them to understand what's happening in the brain and what's happening with
Mm.
the brain at different developmental stages. I just did a couple weeks ago a YouTube video with a reading interventionist, and I did it on reading and middle school and executive functions. And it was fascinating to really focus on that one topic. I've never really kind of focused that much on executive functions in one topic at one time. And it was fascinating. And she was like, as soon as she kind of saw my one video I shared with her, she said, I have this training program and you have to be part of it. She's like, because my educators need to understand that it doesn't just involve reading and decoding and things like that. It involves them understanding executive functions. So, as an educator, like that is what's important to me is making
Mm.
sure that educators understand more often than not, these kids are not lazy. It's not that they're not
Yeah.
motivated. It is that they do not know what to do in that moment and they don't even know where to start. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember years ago, I had a student who was so bright. He had above average IQ, but he could not start a sentence. He could not write a paragraph. He couldn't get his thoughts from his head to the paper. And that was something that we
Mhm.
had to work on for a very long time. And so educators need to know what are the different tools and what is the brain science behind those tools. And so I do have that course, but if you go to connectedpathwaysacademy.com, I do give free webinars. In fact, August is going to be, I'm not sure when this is going to be on. So, anyways, make sure that you check connectedpathwaysacademy.com. And there I have free webinars that I give for educators on a variety of different topics. There's also some past workshops that I have given. There is one in particular that's a paid one. And that one is actually on perfectionism, which is another topic that's closely associated with executive function, but it's on perfectionism, its role with anxiety and executive functions. And I highly recommend that people watch that. There's also another one that's available on how to make your student their own executive assistant, looking at what
Mm.
that support is needed that last year of high school or that summer before high school. How do we get kids ready for that transition? So I try to give free workshops as well as having the course. And then for people that take the course, they actually become part of a community. So I do have an executive function community. They're part of that community for a year. And I do just community meetings on a variety of different topics. Sometimes it's just reviewing a tool. The other day, somebody plopped in a website for games, and I want to look at that and do a recording. So there's just a variety
Mm.
of different things. But because executive functions are brain based, and because we're constantly learning more and more about the brain, we're always learning about executive functions. This is not a field that's just, going to be what you learn the first time and it's going to stay that way.
Mm.
And I think that that's why educators, it doesn't trickle down to educators. I think that executive function started in the field of neuropsychology. There was a neuropsychologist that developed, talked about it many, many years ago. And that's where it started. And I think that because it started there and not in education, that unfortunately there seems to be a huge gap between those two fields. And so I try to close those gaps. I try to make it so that, educators understand the science, the tools, and and I'm not a licensed psychologist, let me just put that out there, but I do ask to see a psychological report or a neuropsych if a student has had one, because I did work under a neuropsychologist for so many years. I can look at that from a coaching perspective and see what I have to
Mm.
do as a coach to help that particular student, both strength wise and challenge wise.
I
Yeah.
love that. But one thing that you also said that I think is so important for us to point out is that you said trained coaches, because what I am seeing so often is people that might just be good at organizing for themselves, or I think transitioning out of the classroom or what have you, and because they've worked with students for so long, they just assume that they can coach on executive function, and so they go on to that. But so what are some things, if you're looking for a coach, What are some things that you might want to look for in terms of qualification for someone that you might want to work with yourself, your student, your child, whoever?
You
Because
want
there's so many
Yeah,
that I'm seeing right now.
you wanna ask what their training is. If they tell you that they've been trained as an ADHD coach or an academic coach, that is not enough because those 2 things are focused just on ADHD or academics. You really want a coach for executive functions to have been trained in executive functions, but you also wanna ask a little bit about that training. Was it brain-based or was it just tool-based? Because you want to make sure that
Okay.
they've been in a comprehensive. Again, that curriculum question, if a coach tells you that they have a curriculum, run. And you want to also kind of, ask them, how long will my student be in coaching? If a coach gives you an exact answer, I would be very hesitant to work with that individual because I have had kids that have been in coaching for 4 months, but I've also had kids that have been in coaching for like 6 years, right? So that question is not like when parents ask me, well, how long will my kid be in coaching? I say to them, well, there's a couple of different scenarios. I'll explain to you those different scenarios and how that works. So you want to ask that question and make sure that the coach acknowledges that sometimes change takes time. Sometimes if my student has multiple areas of challenges, that it's going to take longer. Sometimes if depression or anxiety is part of the picture, it's going to take longer. And so making sure that this person is well-rounded in their training. Our coaches at Connected Pathways Coaching go through my 30-hour program, which is also has an annual recertification. So it's not just that 30 hours, they get recertified every year. And then they also have gone through a 40-hour training program in academic coaching, which is based a lot on the science behind learning, because I feel Gretchen Wegner has a program called the Anti-Boring Learning Lab, and I require all of my coaches to go through her program because I think it's so crucial. So that's what you want to ask. You want to make sure that the coaches really have that experience. This is something that probably comes from the younger me, but also as someone who has a lot of younger staff. Don't look at the age. Age doesn't necessarily mean experience. Just because somebody's been teaching for 30 years doesn't mean they're going to be able to teach executive functions. But you can have somebody who has a bachelor's degree, who has had that specialized instruction that can provide that service. So that's another
Mm.
thing, is don't necessarily look at the age, look at the experience of the individual. And those are some of the things I would definitely look out for.
And then you said if you're looking at tools based versus brain based, if someone is looking at tools based, you said run. Why are we saying run?
Because, in my opinion, some of the programs that I have seen out there are very tool based, which means that someone goes through an executive function training. They're taught a variety of tools, which is awesome, but they're not taught about the brain science behind, which means, how do I know which tool to use and when? How do I know that I shouldn't be going to planners before I talk about cognitive flexibility and help with regulation? And so I
Mm.
just want to make sure that people recognize that that is why executive function is a specialized training, in my opinion, is because the balance of brain science and tools to support an individual.
Okay. It makes There's so much to think about, but
Mhm.
it just gives me hope that there's so much support out there for people who might need it. I think for me, well, I guess I had one more question before I wanted to transition in. For the 30-hour course that you offer, is it self-paced? Are they going to be or do you have cohorts? How does the program work? Because I know for teachers, sometimes time can be limited. So I wanted to give people a little bit more understanding of how they could take advantage of it, because I want as many people to take your course as possible.
So, first of all, if you are an educator working in a school system, I'll be happy to provide you with a letter to try to get reimbursement from your school. So I already kind of have
Oh,
that
amazing.
drafted that you can utilize. Second thing is, it's a 30-hour course. 10 of those hours are live sessions. But I understand we all live in a busy world. So we record live sessions. And if for some reason you're unable to attend them, you can watch the recording and do the activity that's associated with that live session. So they do have that ability. But if we do run cohorts, I'm trying to do a daytime, nighttime, so that we have two different kind of times available. Yeah.
I don't know if we can tell, it's getting dark. Krista and I are how many hours apart right now? Probably 8, 9. She's
Yes.
in DC. I'm in Dubai. So I'm hoping that there's people from all over the world that might be able to start taking your course. And so hopefully that the
Yes, I've
variations in
even had a
time will
tutor.
help.
I've even had a tutor from Mauritius who signed up and took it, so she was able to complete it. She did wake up at unusual times sometimes to do the live sessions live, but the dedication there, yes. And also make sure to find me on LinkedIn because I do put a lot of like informational videos there. That is kind of my main social media, although I also do have an Instagram. We actually have two Instagram, one for the coaching side of the business, which is more for parents, and then also one for the academy side, which really is directed towards educators. Unfortunately, as a business owner, I've recognized that it's really hard to address everybody with one thing. So we have two different websites, two different Instagrams. So, and the last resource,
No
if you
worries.
are a parent, we do have a Facebook group that's called Neurodivergent Kids. And that is also where we provide a lot of parent information. So that is also available. Yep.
And all of that we will put into the show notes so that everyone can access it. Today I really wanted to, I mean, yes, I understand that this is my podcast is called The Joy of Neurodiversity, but so often, so much of what we talk about, it impacts everyone. So I'm happy that we have it like we've shown that everyone. I thought that I had my phone on do not disturb. Clearly I did not. My apologies. What I love that we're looking at just tools and resources that can support our neurodivergent students. As we said, I don't think anyone's really neurotypical, but I didn't even want to focus so much on that and think for people. I don't want people to get into the mindset because so often I hear people saying, oh, they have ADHD, they have executive function challenges, but it's not the case. Anyone can. And so it's why I just like on purpose did not want to make it sound as if like this is a problem for only neurodivergent students. I mean, I know that there are might be some additional things that neurodivergent students might need to have in terms of coaching, but for me, I would just caution parents that if that's something that your students need, then a good coach is going to be able to know what additional things need to be addressed in sessions, but anyone can benefit from this work. But with that said, I am a neurodivergent thinker, and sometimes I just need those little quick tips or quick little wins that we can that to I guess I don't know feel fulfilled or figure out when you're I don't even know what I'm trying to say. But okay, if we're looking at, we've covered a lot of executive function, how it impacts our lives, how we can support through coaching. But I'm sure that there's some simple things that we can do so people can start seeing that these are skills that we can take little steps to achieve. So everything, like little everything, everyday things that people can do to find a little bit of success. So can you share maybe a couple of practical tips to help folks support executive function in their lives or with the people that they love, so that they can see that these are everyday skills that we can acquire?
Yes, absolutely.
If that's a question that makes, I feel like I took a long roundabout answer way to get to that ask.
Yes. If you are the parent of younger children, you should have a part of your house that has a calendar and an analog clock. We can only
Mm.
see the passage of time with an analog clock. Digital clocks were probably one of the worst inventions for humans, especially for individuals that have struggle with time, right? And so having that analog clock and that calendar so that you can actually review a day with your child, whether it's in the morning or it's the afternoon, with the clock right there. When it's 4 o'clock, we have to be out the door, which means at 3:30, we have to be able to have already gotten dressed, already had our snack, already changed, and be ready. So, what time do we need to start getting ready then, right? So, having conversations like that, but having that analog clock with the calendar. If you are a busy individual, it doesn't need to be a written calendar. You can use Skylight. There's something called a DAC board. Those are digital calendars that will sync right with your calendars. So there are easy ways to do it if you can. Notability is one of my favorite applications. I've never been tested. I probably have either working memory challenges, that's an executive function, or processing speed, which is just another cognitive skill. Either way, I struggle sometimes when I'm attending a webinar. I struggle while I'm taking notes. So Notability, I absolutely love. It's only with Mac products, unfortunately. There are some others out there, like Glean is one of the ones that's comparable, but Notability records. Not only does it record, but if I'm listening to someone and they have something I want to review, I can put a star right there and I can touch that star and go back to that part of the recording. So how
Oh,
awesome of a program to be able to use, like, as a professional when you're, doing workshops and webinars and you want to make sure that you're capturing everything. So that's a really good tip. And that has so many tools and techniques out there for students these days. It's absolutely amazing. So that's a really another quick tip.
notability.
Yeah,
Notability.
Notability. I'm trying to think of some of the apps I use every day in my life that help me. Otter is another one. OTTR, right? I use Otter almost every single day to get my thoughts down, and then I can convert it to
Mm.
text, and then I can do whatever I want with the text. So that's a great thing because, again, sometimes we have these great thoughts in our head, but if we try to convert it to either typing it or writing it, we lose information. And so just pushing record and kind of capturing our thoughts, these are, that's working memory. That, Notability is a little bit of working memory, a little bit of attention. The clock was obviously time management, planning, organization. So we're seeing how there's little things that we can put in place every day, different tools that we can utilize that can actually help in different ways. Last tool, and of course, I didn't have it ready. I didn't think I was going to mention this. I love taking model magic with kids and creating what's called a pause button. Model magic is this Crayola thing that's really cool. It's like photo, but then it dries light, right? I have them create a pause button. Pause buttons are great. It's a visual cue to be working with your child or your student. Many of our kids who are neurodivergent lie. They don't lie on purpose. It's usually out of
Mm.
shame. It's either they've forgotten
Yeah.
or whatever. The pause button is a wonderful way to teach kids to pause, reflect, and change their answer without getting in trouble. So, a pause button is another
Mm.
thing I love. It also could be good for your kids who might be struggling with attention or focus. And you can say, hey, you want to hit your pause button and think about what we need to do next, or think about, like, what's the next step, things like that. So that's another quick thing that people can put in place for executive functions.
I Everything that you just said, I can totally relate to. But even when I think about as a teacher, how many students didn't understand analog clocks, but it's so important to be like, okay, you're here.
Mhm.
And when we get here, we need to be able to transition to something else, and so that they can slowly see that time ticking towards their cutoff is so impactful. I remember my niece used to tell me, when she would come over. I have three nieces, but my oldest one, when I was watching her, I would really want to stick to her schedule. I knew how difficult it was how difficult it was for my sister to like get her on this schedule. I didn't want to be the auntie that messed it up. And she would always tell me, she told me, my mommy said that today I can stay awake a little bit longer. Like I can stay awake until 8:00. And I'm like, she doesn't know what 8:00 means. So I showed her a clock, like, okay, this is what your mom said. This is when, like, and I put a star on it, like, this is when you were getting. So when you see that, there is no I need water, there is no all these excuses. Like, we are going to bed. But
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
it's so true. And even just having, I guess, for parents of those neurodivergent kids who might not understand what is happening inside our brains, when you're talking about any of the tools that record things, like for me, even I am extremely I look at big pictures, I break everything down. If something doesn't make sense to me, I'm just like, well, why did they do it that way? And then I completely lose track of what it was that was happening and what I was supposed to be listening to. And I know so many neurodivergent that do that, and probably neurotypical people too. But just being able to go back and be like, okay, I know I wasn't paying
Mhm.
attention, or I was daydreaming, or I was overanalyzing something in that moment, or I was visualizing something that I was trying to figure out, to be able to go back and just say, okay, I know that I noted something at that point, and now I can go back and listen to it, is so crucial.
It is.
Okay, I could speak to you forever, but we have to start wrapping things up. So, if you were to look at, if you were to just think of, for our listeners, one message that you would want everyone to just remember, or that just bit of you've given us so much advice, but that just that one message about executive function that you might want them to walk away with after listening to this podcast, what would it be?
All of our brains are unique. What works for me doesn't necessarily work for you. Yeah.
Mm.
That's the biggest thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the biggest thing, is just really understanding that everything is individualized. And so it's just figuring out what's right for that individual to be successful.
Thank you for that. And one thing that I would also add, especially to parents, what works for you as a person, as a thinker, even if it makes it a little bit easier for you, or even as teachers, because we teach and organize the way that our brains work. Just because it works for you, it does not mean that it's going to work for your students, or it does not mean
Mhm.
that it's going to work for your child. You can have the same genetics, you can live in the same house, it does not matter. And so being able to have that flexibility to make those pivots and figure out what works best for your little one, or the people who you're entrusted to teach and to care for, just knowing that you need to be flexible is really important. So,
Absolutely.
Chris, if how can people, I hope, I mean, I don't want to overload you with people, but I mean, how can people learn more about your work and connect with you should they want to?
So LinkedIn's probably the best place, just because I tend to be there a lot. And that's where I really try to put a lot of messages and things there. But also, always feel free to reach out through either of the websites, either connectedpathwayscoaching.com or connectedpathwaysacademy.com. And you can always reach us. I have an amazing team of coaches that works for the company, who have all been trained by me. And, we really, I'm so lucky to have the team that I have, because every single one of them cares so much about the students that they work with. And just one more thing before I leave. As many people know, it's a little bit, the US is having a very unique time period, let's just say that. And for
Yes.
some of our students, we've noticed a huge relationship between neurodivergence and our students being part of the LGBTQ plus community. We do have
Mm.
two coaches that are part of the community. It is one of our goals to get a group of students that are both looking for executive function coaching and are part of the community, to have that wraparound support. And so if you do know a student who is interested, please reach out to us, because we want to make sure that there's a safe place for them as well as any student out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And oh, there was something I was going to ask you. It just flew out of my. It literally just flew out of my mind. My working memory just was like, nope. I'm done with that. Okay, let let me regroup. So we will drop all of that information into the show notes so everyone can access that. Oh, I remember what I was going to ask you. Your coaching, is it face to face? Is it online?
Good question.
How does that work?
So we're all virtual. Before COVID, we were about 50-50, but since COVID, because we provide services to kids all over the world, we have students in China, we have students in Europe, I mean, like all over. So we are virtual. So we do everything over Zoom, but we make it interactive. We do mail out like a coaching kit to our students to try to make it a little bit more interactive with some tools. And so we've had a lot of success, even with kids that are in elementary school. So coaching is a one-to-one situation. So it's much different than what people were experiencing during COVID when it came to education online. So, yeah.
So anyone around the world, as long as they can manage the schedule, can work with one of your coaches. And are there weekend slots? Is there a variety of times when people can reach out for coaching?
So we do have a couple of weekend spots. So we do have some of that availability. It's mostly Monday through Friday. The other thing that we also incorporate in our coaching, and I think that this is such a nice thing, is in the world of ADHD, there's something called body doubling. It's basically co-working with another individual. We have about 6 interns that we bring on every semester from colleges in the country. And one of the things that we do is we offer 1 hour of body doubling Monday through Friday and 1 hour of like study support Monday through Friday. One of those sessions are included in every single package. You can get additional if you want, but that is a service that we tried to add because there were so many kids that kind of just need that nudge to get things done. So, yeah.
So someone side by side as they're finishing a task to kind of help them with that support.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
Well, I could talk to you. My nerdy brain absolutely loves this stuff. And I'm walking away with this conversation with so many gems. And I truly hope that the listeners are as well. And I hope that as many people as possible reach out to you and your incredible team to help with support. I know I have many people who I'm sending your way, but I cannot thank you enough for just sharing your story, your wisdom, your passion for the work, and your passion really does come through clearly.
Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. I think honestly, I tell people this all the time, and I think it's just so important to show gratitude in these in these times. Like, I'm just a girl trying to to do a podcast and give us people as much information as possible, but it has just been so amazing to see any people who are willing to come on to the podcast and just share their expertise. And I will never stop being grateful for everyone who's willing to do that. And even just the experts who are coming on during season 2, like, I am so excited about it. And so thank you so much for just giving us deeper understanding about really what's going on beneath the surface for so many people, and especially for those who are struggling with just deficits that might go unseen or misunderstood. And so I think that you've given us so much insight, and I honestly cannot thank you enough.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And please reach out if anybody needs any assistance. I'm always happy to help. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. And to our listeners, if this conversation resonated with you, please take a moment to reflect on your own executive function strengths or challenges. And if you think that there's someone in your life that can benefit from this episode, please share it with your friends, your teachers, your colleagues, anyone that could just use a little bit more understanding about this. And I know that there's so many people who need it. And of course, if you are not doing so already, please follow, like, and subscribe to The Joy of Neurodiversity for more conversations and just to celebrate the many different ways that our minds work. So we will see you in the next episode, and thank you so much for being here. And that's a wrap for this episode of The Joy of Neurodiversity. I hope today's conversation left you feeling inspired, empowered, and seen. Remember, neurodiversity isn't something to fix, it's something to celebrate. If you loved this episode, don't forget to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. It truly helps more people find this space of understanding and joy. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. And let's keep the conversation going. Connect with me on Instagram at The Joy of Neurodiversity and LinkedIn at Joy Buckner, and share your thoughts using the hashtag The Joy of Neurodiversity. New episodes drop every other Thursday, so be sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next dose of neurospicy brilliance, deep dives, and empowering conversations. Until next time, embrace who you are, celebrate how you think, and keep rewriting the narrative, because the world needs your brilliance.
Think big, be bold, and never dim your neurodivergent spark, because we were never meant to fit in.